People have done a lot of things, both great and terrible, in the name of religion. In order to do either, they obviously needed to be convinced that their beliefs were true, which is where religious experience often steps in.
Application, Allah help me, guide me to the truth. If you guide me to the truth, I'll never leave it. And I knew in my heart, Allah was telling me in my heart that Islam, this is true, you know? And I knew right there it's the correct religion.
I felt this tremendous infusion of joy, like a balloon.
A huge downside when people build the foundation of their faith on such experiences is that it's almost impossible to argue someone out of something they were never argued into in the first place. This can be very worrying, depending on the context. But it turns out, unsurprisingly, that such experiences are an unwise foundation to build belief on. And religious people should stop putting so much stock in religious experience. Why is this? Well, basically, that you're experiencing God, or in contact with some divine reality, is not the best explanation of what is going on. To see why, we need to first acknowledge that not all religious experience is created equal. Basically, people can mean a wide variety of things when claiming that they have or have had religious experiences, and this actually matters a lot. I think it's helpful to think of such experiences on a spectrum of mundane to intense. So let's start with the more mundane. These kinds of experiences might include a person being moved to interpret a sunset as showing the glory of the Christian God, spontaneously feeling assurance that Allah is speaking with them when reading the Quran, or having a sense that a deity they worship is displeased by their actions. Now, of course, each of these examples could be experienced more or less intensely, but when religious experience is perceived in its most mundane forms, it's usually stuff like this. Experienced subtly in the day-to-day. On my view, at most, experiences like this can only provide very weak evidence for the position in question. And skeptics should basically lose zero sleep over them. The main reason is that the best explanation for such patterns is that they form as a result of already believing some particular religion, usually taught to a person when they were a child. This leads to normal human experiences, such as seeing beauty in nature or feeling guilty, being given an extra layer of religious significance. As Michael Huemer explains, quote, "If you have a strong standing belief, then you are going to spontaneously interpret things you experience in terms of that belief when given the chance. Hence, you'll find yourself spontaneously having thoughts that entail the belief. Spontaneously in the sense that you don't decide to have these thoughts, they just naturally occur to you, and you may not know why. This happens not just with religion, but with any belief that you feel strongly about. So if you're one of the people who spontaneously interprets events in your life in terms of God, that's probably because you already believe in God, and if you had some other belief system, then you would probably be forming different spontaneous interpretations in terms of that other belief system." Unquote. What about religious experiences that are more impressive or intense? These are on better footing, but there are still serious problems with putting too much stock in them. The main issue is the well-known problem of religious diversity. People from all over the world have different kinds of experiences that point them to the truth of conflicting claims. There are at least two subsequent problems this creates. First, it calls into question the specific claims that religious people are making. To use an example I've used before, if you witnessed a car crash and several other eyewitnesses disagree with your version of the story in important ways, you would likely lower your confidence in your version of the story, as you should. The same goes for religious experiences. Once a person realizes that vast swaths of people who are spiritually seeing divine reality completely disagree with them on what kinds of truths these experiences point to, they should be more modest in the specific conclusions they draw from their own experiences. Worse still, that the contents and or interpretations of those experiences just so happen to basically always align with what people already believe or the predominant beliefs of their culture positively points to the idea that prior beliefs and cultural influence are responsible for the shape that such experiences take, not some spiritual reality. This, again, calls into question the specific beliefs that religious people think can be justified through such experiences. As Stephen Law notes, quote, religious experiences tend to be culturally specific. Christians experience the guiding hand of Jesus, while Muslims experience Allah. Just like experiences of alien abduction, reports of alien abduction pretty much stop at certain national borders, the character of religious experiences often changes at national borders. In Catholic countries, the Virgin Mary is often seen, but not over the border in a predominantly Muslim country. This strongly suggests that to a significant degree, religious experiences are shaped by our cultural expectations, by the power of suggestion. And once we know that a large part of what is experienced is a result of the power of suggestion, we immediately have grounds for being somewhat suspicious about what remains." Unquote. This bleeds into the worry that we can explain religious experiences perfectly well without appealing to a supernatural cause, and that natural explanations are sufficient. This, again, should threaten a believer's dogmatic confidence in their experience. After all, how could someone really be sure that they could tell the difference with any degree of certainty between veridical experiences brought about by a deity and non-veridical experiences brought about by a combination of all too human sociological and psychological pressures? When we look at the context surrounding most religious experiences, this becomes even more apparent. Most usually take place in the context of meditation and prayer, isolation, fasting, collective singing and chanting, places of worship with grand architecture, giving, and ritualistic activities. Put another way, spiritual experiences come most reliably through spiritual disciplines, or whatever you want to call them. And many religious people are not shy about this fact. Unfortunately, that's just admitting that intentionally training your brain to frame things in a certain way is crucial to getting the job done, which is exactly what we would expect to find if there is a purely natural explanation for religious experiences. Needing to train your brain to frame things in a certain way, or needing to put yourself in certain situations to get religious experiences, is compatible with the hypothesis that the resulting experiences point to something beyond the natural. But the fact that this is necessary pretty much all of the time is more expected on the hypothesis that there are merely natural explanations at work. Moving back to the problem of religious diversity. It also calls into question whether religious experience is a good way of coming to know things about the world in the first place. As J.L. Schellenberg notes, quote, "If so many religious experiential practices are unreliable, then why not this one? If powerful experiences full of apparent meaningfulness and illumination may come to persons of intelligence and virtue, and yet be completely delusive, then what reason do you have to suppose that such is not the case here?" Unquote. The idea is not that initially trusting your experiences is bad. It's that once we're aware that certain kinds of experiences appear unreliable, and we determine that we're in a bad epistemic position to draw much from them, we should lower our confidence that said experiences are connected to anything in reality, full stop. If I see an orange on my table, then it's reasonable for me to be very confident that there is an orange on my table absent defeaters. Now let's say I'm wearing some futuristic glasses that randomly project realistic-looking fruit into my field of vision. The situation is different now. I'm not in a good epistemic position to have a high level of confidence that there's actually an orange on the table, even if there is, unless I have memories of buying it, leaving it there, etc. This seems to be somewhat analogous to the situation we're in with religious experiences. If people in general are highly predisposed to have non-veridical religious experiences, this should temper our excitement regarding how much confidence our own experiences should give us in religious claims, even if they seem powerful. But I have questions about how powerful these experiences are for most people in the first place. It's common to use the analogy of sense perception when talking about this, but that's potentially problematic, as it's not really clear whether experience that is less forceful and perpetually obvious than sense perception can really benefit as much as some people want from this analogy. Compare two kinds of experiences. The sensory perception, I have two hands, and say a spiritual perception that God is now speaking directly into your life through the sermon you're hearing. Let's say the second experience is very emotive and feels real to you. Now consider a thought experiment. There is a truth demon, and the truth demon asks for your answer to a certain hypothetical question and will send you to hell for eternity if you give the wrong answer. The theoretical question is, which perception do you trust more? That you have two hands, or that God was speaking to you through that sermon? Keep in mind, the truth demon knows the real answer. Let's tweak it a second time. Like a normal person, you have the moral perception that it would be unfair for a child dying in infancy to wake up for the first time to eternal conscious torment in hell. At a different time, you also have a vivid spiritual perception of being infused with grace through the sacraments. Again, the theoretical question on pain of hell for an eternity is, which perception do you trust more? I think this should hopefully illustrate to most people that whatever spiritual experiences they think they've had, there are other kinds of experiences that they treat with greater reverence. This is also supported by the fact that most people who report having religious experiences live basically just like everyone else. Their holy book is obviously God's word, but they barely read it. Their lost friends and neighbors are apparently going to suffer forever, yet they don't shed any tears, lose any sleep, or reassess how they use their time and money in any major way. They would do sins in front of their deity, who apparently is as real as the external world, that they wouldn't do in front of their mother. None of this means that I think religious experience is completely worthless. I just don't think people should base their faith on it. It should be a very modest piece of evidence among many, not the foundation of the house. All of this proves too much, you might say. We're entitled to take positions in the midst of disagreement. Sure you are. But the more genuine peer disagreement there is, the more you should hold your positions with an open hand rather than a closed hand. Further, I don't really think there's genuinely a deep disagreement about certain kinds of things in the way there is about religious experiences and what they point to. Take morality, for example. Is it really the case that human beings have radically different conceptions of what is good, or do we mostly disagree with each other over the application? I would argue the latter. If we think about radically divisive issues like abortion, none of the parties disagree about the fact that murder is bad. The disagreement is about whether abortion is murder. None of the parties disagree about the fact that choice is good. The disagreement is about whether choice is relevant in that context. Additionally, the point isn't merely that there is diversity among religious experiences and therefore we should be skeptical. It's that we're prone to false positives in the area of hidden agency specifically. Stephen Law calls claims about such things X-claims and writes, quote, "Part of the case for supposing we're unreliable judges of the truth regarding X-claims is provided by X-claim diversity. Some beliefs involving such hidden agents are incompatible with others. Religious belief provides one obvious example. Religions disagree about the number of gods, the characteristics of those gods, and so on. Only a minority of these conflicting God claims can be true. However, X-claim diversity is just one facet of a much broader range of evidence supporting the view that we are generally unreliable judges of their truth, particularly when judgment is grounded in some combination of testimony and subjective experience. Many X-claims have been straightforwardly falsified. Note that what evidence we have for our unreliability regarding X-claims is for a proneness towards false positive belief in X-claims. We know, regarding our belief in such hidden agents and associated magical and/or extraordinary powers, faculties, objects, and events, that a very large proportion of these beliefs are mistaken. By contrast, there's little evidence to suggest we are prone to false negative X-claim beliefs, i.e., that we're highly susceptible to mistakenly disbelieving in hidden beings, etc., that actually are there." Unquote. There are ways to reconcile these experiences that point to some deeper truth, you might say. Huemer describes two ways you might try to do this, and then hits the nail on the head. Quote, 1. You can give religious experiences some non-literal or non-factual interpretation. For example, one can claim that the truth of religious ideas consists in their effectiveness at bringing about spiritual transformations in human life. 2, you can find some incredibly vague lesson, such as, there is a spiritual reality. My problem with approach 1 is that it abandons the claims that everyone was interested in. People who have religious experiences think the experiences are literally revealing objective facts to them. That is what is in dispute. If you're going to interpret them metaphorically or non-factually, then you're really rejecting religious experience. My problem with approach 2 is that in order to make the common ground universal, you have to make it so vague and general that you are hardly saying anything. For example, there is a spiritual reality. It is not at all impressive that much common ground can be found, since it could be expected in advance that, however unreliable religious experience might be as a source of information, at least some super vague, super general lesson could be attributed to all such experiences. Indeed, think of how impressive it would be if all, or even a great many, religious experiences really had substantial commonalities. What if people in multiple different cultures that had no contact with each other all had visions of speaking to a divine being who had 4 arms, an elephant head, and called himself Ganesha? Okay, if that happened, I'd really start to think maybe Ganesha is real. That's the sort of thing I would expect if religious experiences were really caused by supernatural beings. But of course, we don't see anything like that. Instead, we have only the minimal possible commonalities, like that all religious experiences are in some sense experiences of spiritual realities. Super lame, unquote. Super lame indeed. Do you know what else I think is super lame? Christian double standards. Tap this video next to me to see what I mean.